All you rock and roll animals out there, this is Marc Ferrari from Keel, Cold Sweat, and Wayne's World, and you are listening to the Nothing Shocking podcast. Turn it up.
Want to know what's going on in the world of music? Then tune in to the Nothing Shocking podcast, a non-genre based, all ages friendly rock and roll program. Join us weekly for interviews with all your favorite rock stars from the mainstream to the underground. You can find us at nothingshocking.libsyn.com or anywhere you download podcasts.
We're putting the band back together.
The numbers all go to 11.
I'm talking about bands that rock. Led Zeppelin. What about Sabbath? AC/DC. Motorhead.
Does that mean it's louder? Isn't it any louder?
Well, it's one louder, isn't it?
We're not worthy. We're not worthy.
Why don't you just make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder?
These go to 11.
I get up off the ground and raise my head. Days like this, think I should be dead. One for Satan, two for me. Let's cheat the devil, it's fun, don't you agree?
Welcome to the Nothing Shocking podcast. I'm your co-host, Jeff Untied, and with me in Dog Bowl Studios is
Coach Nez.
You can find the Nothing Shocking podcast on Libsyn or any podcatchers. Like our Facebook page or follow us on Twitter at NoShockPod.
You can also find the Nothing Shocking podcast on Rock Rage Radio every Sunday morning at 7 a.m. Central Time. Our sponsor is Ragged Records, located in downtown Rock Island, Illinois, and downtown Davenport, Iowa. We would like to thank the Hong Kong Sleepover for allowing us to use their music for our intro and bumper ending. Tonight's guest is
Marc Ferrari
of Keel
and Cold Sweat.
Yep. What a great interview. He wasn't promoting anything on this episode, but we had an in-depth conversation about all of his business endeavors and what have you.
Kind of dived into the past a little bit.
Yeah. So, hey, let's get to it.
All right.
Good night. Marc, welcome to the Nothing Shocking podcast. I'd like to introduce to you my co-host, Jeff Untied.
Marc, it's great to meet you tonight.
And great to meet you, too.
Well, thank you for all the correspondence. We're excited to have you. It's just a real pleasure to have you on the show tonight. So, as we see the COVID-19 restrictions lifted, what endeavors are you going to be up to here as these COVID-19 mitigations drop?
Well, fortunately, I haven't been that affected, other than, unfortunately, not being able to go to rock shows until recently. I continue to live my life, cautiously. There's definitely some different schools of thought out there as to how serious this is, if there isn't even a pandemic. There's some folks that don't believe there's a pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
I've always been a very data-driven and fact-driven guy, so I tend to believe what the science indicates. But I was lucky that I was not impacted as greatly as some other folks were. Especially musicians. I have many musician friends that were touring. That was their main, their main form of income, getting out there and doing shows and selling merch and that kind of thing. And a lot of musicians really struggled in the last couple of years, touring musicians. And I'm happy to see that touring is, starting to come back around again. Obviously we got the Motley Crue Def Leppard Stadium tour finally going out, after the third try.
Yes.
But again, I'm lucky that, my life was impacted, but it wasn't turned upside down like a lot of folks, unfortunately, were impacted a lot worse than I was.
Oh, fantastic. I kind of wanted to bring this to 2017. You published a children's book called "Don't Dilly Dally Silly Sally." We've spoke to many rock artists in the past that have dabbled in the child entertainment industry. Can you talk a little bit more about the creation of your first children's book?
Well, yeah, I sure would be happy to. So I have a daughter who is now 19, but at a very early age, it was quite apparent that my daughter was time challenged, and she, which is the opposite of me, because I've always been very punctual and very time centric. You don't get time back. It's one thing you learn in life is you don't get your time back. So, but when my daughter was very young, it was apparent that she was marching to the beat of her own drummer, so to speak, and we tried everything to get her out the door on time for things. Setting the clocks ahead a few minutes, or telling her we had to leave at a certain time when we normally wouldn't have to leave that early, but we still miss things. And out of the blue, one day I just blurted out, "Don't dilly dally, silly Sally," and I don't know where it came from. It just, it's just like I grabbed it from the air, and I kind of made a mental note on that, and I was working full time for Universal at the time. I didn't really have the ability to really develop it. But after I retired from Universal, I circled back to that story. Initially I wrote a story. It was for her. The story was about a time challenged girl. I'm speaking from firsthand experience here, because they say write about what you know. And then I kind of massaged it to to where it got to be, and this is my second book, by the way. I published a book called Rockstar 101. I know you'll ask me about that later, but so the process submitting to book publishers is semi-similar to submitting to record companies. You submit in this case a manuscript, an idea, an outline, and maybe some marketing ideas. And, I got a lot of rejections, but I got one yes. That's all it takes is the one yes. And so then it was almost a year process from the time that I got my deal to the time the book came out. And there was a heavy revision process, and then working with the illustrator, and then working with the marketing people and everything. So it really was an interesting experience, And yes, you mentioned that there have been quite a few folks who have written children's books. I don't know if there's ever been one by a heavy metal guy or hard rock guy, but all I can tell you is that the story really resonated not only in my family, but I've heard from so many other people who have time-challenged people in their family. It doesn't have to be just kids. There's time-challenged adults too. Yes. But it really was a labor of love. And actually, my daughter, who is a graphic artist now, she was about 5 or 6 years old when she sketched some of the some of the drawings that the illustrator, took her sketches and made them into some of the illustrations that you see in the book. So her DNA is all over that book.
Oh, that's cool.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, you kind of alluded to working with Universal. I was going to ask you about MasterSource. In the 90s, you started a catalog company of songs that you could commercially release out to TV and other places. Can you talk a little bit about the creation of that company and how that worked?
Yeah, well, it was quite accidental. As you mentioned, I did start in the early 90s, and the Cold Sweat Band, that album came out in June of 1990. But by the end of that year, we were off the label, and 1991 was the year Nirvana hit, and then all of a sudden, certainly there was kind of a change in musical taste, and the commercial hard rock stuff was passé, and it would have been really, really hard for a dyed-in-the-wool commercial hard rock guy like me to have gotten another record deal in that environment. And so I was kind of faced with some pretty heavy decisions back then. And they say when one door closes, another opens. It was around the same period of time that I had started placing some of my demo recordings in TV shows and films. I had friends that were working, as assistant coffee makers or gophers or whatever on some of these shows. And, if you roll the clock back to the early 90s, there really wasn't the whole music supervision thing hadn't really come into the forefront yet. And there were music libraries that existed prior to me jumping into this, but none of them had songs. None of them had vocals. Mm-hmm. So, like, if you were a film or TV producer back in the early 90s and you wanted to license a Van Halen song, you weren't going to get it, number one. Mm-hmm. It was going to be extremely expensive, extremely time-consuming, and a lot of these bigger artists just were not licensing to film and TV. Mm-hmm. So my idea was, you know what? You're not going to get that Van Halen song or that Garth Brooks song or that Madonna song or that Puff Daddy song, but you know what? I can create something for you that's in the ballpark. It's generically similar to those artists. I never ripped these folks off. I just created music that was generically similar. And my idea took off like a rocket, and then within a couple of years, I was the go-to guy for songs in film and TV. And I developed that company, which was called MasterSource, and over the course of over 10 years, and in 2007, I sold it to Universal. And then I, along with that deal, the deal was I had to work for them. I had to run the company that I sold them. So I stayed 5 years as a Universal Music Group employee, running the company that I sold to them. And it was an interesting experience, being a part of a corporate environment like that, and because I was my own guy for all those years, and then all of a sudden you had to play in the Universal sandbox, Yeah, but I had a great bunch of mentors, and I had a great bunch of people that brought me in, and those 5 years went pretty quick.
Wow. Bringing this back to a book. In 2002, you authored Rockstar 101, A Rockstar's Guide to Survival and Success. Can you give our listeners some insight of the origins of this book, and how did it all come about for you?
Yeah, well, throughout the years, I would get asked many times by up-and-coming musicians, what's it like on the road? How did you get your record deal? How do you put a team together? What are things you have to look out for, And similar to the fact that there were music libraries that existed before I jumped in, there were books on the music business that existed before I decided to write my book. However, there was not a single book that was written by an actual recording artist, someone who had actually started playing in the backyards and playing in the garages and, wound up playing Madison Square Garden, Mm-hmm. From the garage to the garden. Yeah. And I think the book really offers a unique, take, because it was written not to be very technical. I mean, there are some technical aspects to it, but some of these other books, you have to have a law degree to really, fully ingest it, Whereas my audience was, up-and-coming musicians, teenage years to early 20 years, and, I spoke that language, and I think that's why it resonated so well. It is 20 years old and certainly could use an updating, because a lot of the internet-related things that we have now were just kind of coming to the forefront back, 20 years ago. But I kind of wrote it as a labor of love also, and I spent the whole summer working on it. I rented a house up in the mountains, and every day I worked on it a little bit, and by the end of the summer I had the manuscript. And, again, it's kind of like, the whole submission process is similar to that of trying to get a record deal. You submit your manuscript to publishers, and you get a lot of rejections, and if you're lucky, you get one yes, and that's all it takes. So I feel good that this book still continues to resonate with folks today, and even though some of the some of the book maybe can be updated, the underlying the underlying portion of it that really deals with the core of what we're talking about here is still very valid.
Oh, so cool. Jeff, you got the next one?
Well, yeah, I was just going to ask you, and with the pandemic stuff, we had recent artists that say they would practice like 6 hours a day on their instrument and stuff. Are you still playing? And how long do you practice? Do you practice every day?
Well, I wish I had more time to play. The truth is, I don't play as much as I used to, only because my time is so much more divided now than it used to be. When you are following that dream, chasing that dream, that's all your life is about. Your life is about, trying to obtain that goal for yourself. And obviously practicing is a major part of it. You have to be ready for the task, I can tell you when I was a young kid, I was playing 4, 5, 6 hours a day because that was my passion. And back then in the 70s, you didn't have the internet. You didn't have the distractions that you have today. And so I loved to play, and that's what I did. I played every moment that I could. These days I play recreationally. If there's a Keel gig or a Cold Sweat gig, I'm playing a little bit more during those times. But I also took up classical guitar a number of years ago, and I try to play a little bit every day.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
We had Steve Stevens on a few years ago, and he had an interesting quote. He kind of blew us away. He says every day he wakes up with a cup of coffee in his hand, and he stares at one of his guitars, and he says to his guitar, "What are you going to teach me today?" And I thought that was really powerful as an accomplished guitar player as Steve Stevens. Is that kind of your thought process too? Like you're never done studying the guitar?
Well, I'm reminded of an expression that has stayed with me, and you can use it. You can use it for other things besides playing a guitar, but it's the more you know, the more you don't know. Okay, so the more you uncover something, the more you realize there's more to uncover. And the guitar is an instrument that you never completely master. It is the most expressive instrument on the planet. It's completely dependent upon what you do. With both of your hands. If you and I walked up to a piano and played a middle C on the piano, it's going to sound the same. Right, but if you and I played a C or a C chord on a guitar, it's going to sound different because our fingers are different. The pressure that we use on the strings is different. The way we strum is different. So that's why Ed Van Halen could pick up any guitar and sound like Ed Van Halen because it's in the hands. So I agree with Steve Stevens, and that's an interesting quote that he gave you guys, but it's absolutely true. What am I going to uncover today?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
To follow up on that, do you have an extensive guitar collection? Do you consider yourself a collector, or do you?
Well, I've actually the opposite here. I've actually kind of pared down guitars. Back in the touring days, I had maybe 4, 5, 6 at the same time. I have my 68 Les Paul with me that I've owned since high school. I've recorded every Keel track with that guitar. I used to, in the early Keel days, I did play it live, but I retired it from the road when we started going on the road. So I have that. I have a couple of PV Wolfgangs that I love those guitars. They're very, for me, they're everything I need a guitar to be. They're very ergonomic. They play great. They look great. They sound great. And that's been my weapon of choice here since Keel started doing shows again back in 2009. I have my classical guitar, and I have a couple classical guitars and an acoustic guitar. So I've really just kind of pared it down,
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. In the 90s, you wrote a column, Power Sources, for Metal Edge magazine. Was this where you gained your writing chops to become an author of a book? Can you kind of give us, our listeners, an insight of how you started that column or how it came to you?
Well, it came through Jerry Miller, who unfortunately she passed away a year or two back. But Jerry was the editor of the magazine, and by the way, Keel was voted best new band 1985 in Metal Edge magazine. So I think the issue came out in '86, but it was for the '85 poll. And we beat out some pretty amazing bands that year. I think Bon Jovi was on the list, Dokken, a few others. But anyways, getting off on a tangent. So that gig came to me through Jerry. And this is so many years ago. I don't know why she asked me. She probably knew that I knew how to read and write, so that was a plus, plus column. And she knew that I had mentored some bands, Pantera being. By the way, Metal Edge magazine was the first time that Pantera got national attention, and that was through me.
Oh wow,
Jerry.
Cool.
Yeah. So yeah, it was just a fun little gig, reviewing the new toys that were out there, the instruments and special effects and stuff. And, I was a big fan of the magazine, and, it was a little beer money, so, it just kind of made sense to do. And I think I did that 3, 4, 5 years. It was a pretty good run.
It was, yeah. Very impressive. Yeah. As a kid, I loved it. So fantastic. Yeah. Jeff, you got the next one?
Well, I was just going to ask you a little bit about your some of your passions outside of music. I saw you like to hike the mountains of California, and that you've been to the Himalayas. Can you talk a little bit about your experiences?
Yeah, well, being outdoors in general has always been one of my passions. Matter of fact, I just got back from a 2-day backpacking trip to the desert with a buddy of mine. But hiking and backpacking is one of my passions. Fishing, I love fishing. So just being outdoors,
Yeah.
But yeah, back in 2014, I crossed a bucket list item off my list, and I went to Nepal with two buddies, and we hiked to Mount Everest Base Camp. So we didn't climb the mountain, but we hiked to Everest Base Camp, which was the furthest that you're allowed to go, without a permit, and the furthest that you'd want to go without putting your life in danger.
Yeah.
But that was, 10 days of hiking throughout the Himalayas, and it's like 47 miles uphill from the place that you start to the place that you finish. So it's not for everybody. But it was an amazing experience, being in the Himalayas and being in Nepal. The people there are just amazing, and it was an adventure just getting there,
Yeah.
Here in Southern California, I've tagged Mount Whitney, which is the highest mountain in the lower 48, and we have a couple 10,000 footers here in Southern California that I've done, and most weekends I'm doing a day hike, or in the summertime we're doing backpacking trips up to the Sierras and camping, and I just keeps the blood going, man. That's all I can tell you. It keeps the blood going, and maybe that's one reason why I don't have as much gray hair as I do. I don't know.
That's awesome.
Well, awesome. As a film composer, you were honored by the Academy of Arts and Sciences for your contribution on The Guiding Light. Can you talk a little bit more about the experience of working on The Guiding Light and the honor that you received?
Yeah, well, I matter of fact, I think I was honored twice for that, but it was quite the surprise because I didn't know I was up for it. When I started my company MasterSource back in the day, one of my clients was the music supervisor for Guiding Light, and back then they were just kind of starting to use pop music, in some of the scenes, and so he'd ask me if I had anything that existed for a certain scene. If I didn't have anything that existed, I would create something for them. And, apparently, a lot of those cues got used, and, people paid attention to it. I think they probably got some viewer comments on the music, and, all of a sudden, I get this nice little award, and certainly flattered and honored. Guiding Light. I don't know if it's still on there or not, but at the time it was like one of the longest running soap operas in history.
Yes.
I don't watch soap operas, so I couldn't tell you if it's still on or not, but it was at the time, obviously one of the most important ones and one of the longest running ones. So that's how that came about, was through my, my client serving relationships with my company.
Oh, so cool.
Yeah, very cool. I was, when I searched, trying to listen to some stuff for this podcast, I was searching on Apple iTunes, and there was a new track on there. It said May 5th of 2021, and I don't know if that's just when it was downloaded or maybe it's an older track, but it said Brian Tichy and Marc Ferrari, and the song was The Girl Ain't Right.
Yeah, well, Brian and I wrote a lot from my library. I hired Brian quite a lot over the years to write music for MasterSource. As a matter of fact, I hired a lot of my rock star buddies have contributed to MasterSource. Kip Winger has, Mark Slaughter has, Tommy Thayer has, Bob Kulick, rest his soul, had, Robin McCauley has. I know I'm missing some. Dan Reed,
oh, wow.
from the Dan Network. I'm a big fan of his. I hired him. Ty Tabor from King's X, I hired. And so whenever I was able to hire my buddies, I did, and I think that just adds to the whole validity of the library. This is real music by real rock stars,
Yeah.
It wasn't just canned music.
Well, fantastic. Not only the guiding light, but you're credited over 100, many more than 100, films and TV soundtracks. How has the film and TV scoring evolved you as a musician, and how has it changed over the years?
Well, first of all, it's in the thousands.
Oh, is it? Oh my God!
It's in the thousands, and I just stopped counting. And these days, I don't even know. They don't even tell me when the stuff gets licensed anymore. So once in a while, it pops up in my IMDb. Oh, I have a song in this film, or I have a song in that film. All I can tell you is that music became a lot more prevalent in certainly television in the 90s. And I was there at the ground floor of that. A lot of those early spelling shows like Party of Five and Melrose Place, Beverly Hills 90210, they were really pioneering shows because they started using, pop music in the shows. And again, I was the guy for those shows for quite a while. I don't get as much, because again, don't forget I sold my company, so even though I'm still producing music for MasterSource, I'm not out there, soliciting placements anymore. So, but I can tell you that it's still a very healthy area for musicians in general, for songwriters, to be in film and TV, because there's so much more programming now than ever before. I mean, when I started doing this, there wasn't even the CW or the WB network. It was just the three major networks. Then you had Fox come in, and then again CW and the WB, and then everybody now does original programming. HBO, ESPN, Showtime. Years ago, those guys didn't produce programming; they just aired it. Exactly. But now everybody is doing it. And so. There's more opportunities than ever before. The flip side of that is there's more people doing it than ever before, because everybody kind of wants to play in the sandbox,
Absolutely. I want to take you back to 1989. You co-authored Five Card Stud on Ace Frehley's Trouble Walking album, my favorite Ace Frehley solo album. Can you talk a little bit more about the writing process of Five Card Stud and working with Ace Frehley? How'd that all work out for you?
Well, okay, so I'm gonna tell you the truth here. First of all, I was friends with Eddie Trunk well before he was the Eddie Trunk of today.
Right.
Eddie was hired by Megaforce Records, right? He was, I think, a VP or A&R guy. And by the way, Cold Sweat almost signed with Megaforce. So Ed reminded me that he actually interviewed Keel in 1985 when he was like 19 years old or 20 years old. And that's when we first met. And I don't recall that first meeting, but, got to know him pretty well in the late 80s. And so, as you guys know, Ace was signed to Megaforce. And so Ed told me that Ace was looking to write songs with, with various people, and he thought I'd be a good fit. You know, of course, I already had somewhat of the Kiss connection with Gene.
Sure.
And I actually had written songs with Peter Criss, too, demos with Peter back in the late 80s, early 90s. But the song, actually, I wrote that song 100%. The original vocalist on the demo was Oni Logan demoed it for me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and but you know, his managers, the way they were, it was like, well, Ace isn't going to give up, you know, his publishing 100%, so you know, you have to cut him in. So that's kind of how that happened. I didn't mind it, you know. It's kind of, you know, just to have a song on Ace's record. It was obviously a big thrill for me. But his version, a little bit different than mine, but you know, you certainly could tell, you know, who wrote the song. So, but I continue to be good friends with Ace. We text each other quite a bit. And, you know, I've seen him I saw him last year here in Agora Hills, as a matter of fact. So,
oh, fantastic.
You know, the way I look at it is I took so much from him throughout the years. I just gave a little bit back to him. You know, Kiss was the first concert I saw in 1976.
Oh, wow.
You know?
Yeah. All right, so I have one more question for you, and we'll leave you alone for the evening. So this is
that's okay.
Generic question.
Fire away, man.
Yeah, generic question that I ask 90% of all of our artists. But, you know, with social media and the internet being what it is, it's taken the mystery of rock and roll. It's kind of like the cat's out of the bag now. And rock and roll, Zeppelin, Kiss, Hendrix, we could just go down the list of so many different artists, Mick Jagger, the Rolling Stones, Beatles, whatever. They had that mystery aura to them because we just didn't know a whole lot about them. There was, you know, it just wasn't that accessible. Well, now the accessibility is here. If we didn't have the internet, we wouldn't be talking to you right now. With that being said, what do you prefer? Do you prefer the artist's accessibility, or do you miss that mystery of rock and roll?
Well, you raise an interesting question. All I can tell you is that a child of the 70s, you know, I grew up, you know, without MTV, you know, without music videos. And very little, you know, you saw your favorite bands in magazines, you know, but you really bonded with the album, you know, because you got the album, you got the artwork, sometimes the lyrics were in there. You know, I remember, you know, I saw Kiss Alive 1, that album cover. I didn't care what they fucking sounded like. I had to have that album, you know. You know, you were just drawn to it. And I think that's what's missing now with the way music is consumed. It's not absorbed like it used to be. Like, you know, back in the day, again, you've got that album in your hands, and you're listening to this music in the headphones, and you're really, really listening, you know, for every little nuance, you know. And that artwork gets into your DNA, and that lyric gets in, and the image gets into your DNA, you know. And now it's I think it's too easy, you know. I'm not disparaging the internet because you know, obviously it's had so much more positive influence and, you know, positive effect on society in general. But for me personally, again, because of the era that I was brought up in, I really miss that connectivity, you know. And now you know, a lot of folks don't even do albums anymore; they just do singles, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Or if they're doing an album, it's online only, and you don't get that artwork for the most part, you know. You got to print it out on your computer. It's not the same as holding that album in your hand, you know. So you know, it is a two-edged sword, you know. I just think. You know, you got to make the best of it. So, you know, all I can tell you is that, you know, my business certainly, the MasterSource was one of the first libraries to go digital. You know, when I started MasterSource, you know, we were delivering stuff to editors on digital audio tape, DAT tape, that it doesn't even exist anymore. You know, and I remember buying my first CD burner. You know, it was a $2,000 unit back in like 1992, 93. And blank CDs were $8 a piece. So the internet certainly changed all that. It made delivery much more accessible. But with that, again, you know, you lose, you know, you really do lose that connectivity that you had prior to the internet.
Absolutely.
But yeah.
Well, that was a very diplomatic answer you gave us.
well, I'm not saying turn off the internet.
Right.
I still have vinyl, man. I still have I have my. By the way, some of the vinyl albums that I have from the '70s were never released on CDs. So if I want to listen to them, I still have to have that turntable.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, we are out of our allotted time for the evening. Is there anything that we didn't cover tonight that you would kind of like to cover a little bit before we let you go for the evening?
I think you guys have done a pretty good job of, asking some questions that haven't been asked 110 times. And, I always like it when people do their research and dig a little deeper, I feel like I'm a really lucky guy, music's been my passion, since I can remember. 9 years old when I first picked up my first guitar, 14 when I saw my first concert. And, to fast forward to where I am today and to be friends with some of my heroes, the Ace Frehleys and the Pat Travers and the Brad Whitfords and the Eddie Van Halen's, God rest his soul. I got to be friends with all these guys and, consider them, colleagues and friends. It's really an amazing kind of tail wagging the dog thing, to become friends with people that you idolized and, that helped choose and form the path of your life,
Absolutely.
I feel very lucky, and I always want to give back whenever I can, and, I just hope I can still continue to be valid and creative here for many more years.
Oh, yeah. Fantastic. So this is how it's going to work out. Jeff, the editing wizard over here, he's going to have everything edited for you in about 3 to 4 weeks. We have about 4 or 5 episodes to release before yours. But when we do, I'll make sure you're the first one to get it. Share the link wherever you possibly can. That'd be fantastic.
All right.
We'll be back in touch with you about 3 to 4 weeks. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Thanks, Mark. Have a great night.
All right. You got it.
Bye-bye.
lights. If they ever take from you, then you plug out both their eyes. They roll the dice. Take your chances.
Welcome to the night. You think you know Night Demon? Then the Night Demon Heavy Metal Podcast is for you. Step into the darkness as we peel back the curtain to give you an unprecedented, all-access look into the mind and the heart of the demon. We're talking band history, song analysis, studio anecdotes, stories from the road. It's everything a diehard Night Demon fan could want and more. This is the only place to learn the inside scoop, the deep dive trivia, the untold tales from the band members themselves and those closest to the Night Demon story. Need more? The Sacred Night Demon Crypt will be pried open to reveal demo recordings that have never before seen the light of day, all with in-depth commentary by the band and the people who were there for the writing and recording process. This is a gold mine, a treasure trove of all things Night Demon. Head over to nightdemon.net or wherever you listen to podcasts.